Hello everybody, and welcome back to STEM with Dr. D and the Makeup Doctor, ASMR. In this video, we are continuing with the fundamentals of human anatomy and physiology. We are going to be talking about our stress control system. Stress control. Otherwise, more specifically known as the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. ANS. There we go. And before we continue, please be sure to leave feedback about what you liked and what you did not like, because that would be very useful for developing things going forward. I would love to hear from you guys. So, imagine your body is a universe, and every single move, every heartbeat, and breath is a battle between two incredible systems. One that thrives on control and precision, and one that specializes in chaos and autonomy. So what we're talking about in this lecture is the sort of foundations and the principles of our autonomic nervous system, ANS. And we're going to be doing some comparisons with our somatic nervous system, somatic nervous system, which we'll regularly abbreviate as SNS. Now, while these two systems operate in vastly different ways, both are essential to keeping us alive and functioning and preventing us from making very stupid decisions that would result in us pretty much being dead. So, between the two, between our ANS and our SNS, we can think about our, yeah, that's a good way to think about it. We can think about our SNS, or somatic nervous system, as our voluntary commander. Voluntary commander. Commander. There we go. Yeah. Controlling our movements, like reaching for a snack, writing an essay, doing something as simple as flicking a pen on a writing tablet. So anything that's under voluntary control. Whereas our ANS is going to be our silent caretaker. It is going to be managing our background tasks that we generally rarely think about, like keeping our heart beating or keeping our digestive functions continuing, especially after we've had lunch or dinner or whatever meal you've had. So let's talk about how these two systems differ, the SNS versus the ANS. And I'll be using abbreviations regularly, so when we're talking about the SNS, remember that's the somatic nervous system, and the ANS is the autonomic nervous system. The ANS has a few subdivisions, or one notably, and we'll get to that shortly. But it will have an NS and an S as well, but everything will be very easily distinguished. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to specifically mention about that. So, these two systems are going to differ in form and function, and it really truly boils down over control. Control is the central focus of this, or that sort of central factor. What we can control and what we cannot. So we have our SNS and we have our ANS. So our SNS consists of motor neurons that stretch from our brain to our spinal cord. and then directly to our muscles. So you can think of it as sort of a direct phone line to our voluntary actions. So, as far as the key players are concerned, we need to remember that we have our motor neurons in play. And remember, this is or sort of a classic abbreviation for a neuron. So we have motor neurons, we have our sensory neurons, and we have our skeletal muscle. Skeletal, which you will often see just abbreviated as SKM. Capital S, lowercase k, M. So, if you want to wave at a friend, that is the SNS sending a signal from our brain to our arm muscles. The ANS, on the other hand, is slightly more complex. There are two neuron chains that are connecting our brain and spinal cord to our internal organs, like our heart, our lungs, and our intestines. So in this case, we have our preganglionic neurons, we have our postganglionic neurons. We have our autonomic ganglia. Autonomic ganglia. Which are, remember, just collections of neurosomas. And we have our visceral organs, pretty much all of our squishy, squoodly bits, like all of the essential tissues, all of the essential players within our body, especially ones that we truly have no conscious control over. The only thing that we have truly conscious control over is our skeletal muscle. And anybody who tells you otherwise is batty. They're insane. So, visceral organs. So, keep in mind that our SNS is responsible for all voluntary movements. Voluntary movements. And our ANS is responsible for all involuntary, if I can spell, involuntary movements. Our somatic system is important for conscious action and conscious control, while the autonomic system is important for maintaining automatic maintenance. And so together, they work very cohesively to, again, keep us alive. Now, our autonomic nervous system has two major subdivisions that we will talk about shortly. But again, keep in mind that these two work together very, very well, usually in normal physiological situations. So our autonomic nervous system is split into two subdivisions. Really? I was going to say ANS subdivisions. Yeah, that works. So it is split into the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system, which you will often see me abbreviate as SYNS, capital S, lowercase y, and capital N, capital S. And we have our parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous, let's put that further on, nervous system, which you will often see me abbreviate as P lowercase a ANS. And that's to distinguish this from the peripheral nervous system, which is just PNS. And we see PNS in conjunction with our CNS, which is our central nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system, the SYNS, is important. It's useful in distinguishing it from the somatic nervous system, which again, remember, is SYNS. All right. So, with our SYNS, imagine you are hiking in the woods and out of nowhere a bear appears. I always use a bear as the typical classic example of the utility of the autonomic nervous system. So, a bear appears out of nowhere. What happens? Our heart is going to start pounding. Our breathing quickens. Our muscles are going to tense up. That is our sympathetic nervous system springing into action. Our sympathetic division is responsible for preparing our body for emergencies. So it is a part of our fight or flight response. Fight or flight response. Any situation where we are trying to ensure our survival as best as we can. And so the classic effects of the sympathetic nervous system really functioning are things like increased heart rate. We have dilated pupils to bring in more light and allow us to see our environment more effectively. And we have an increase in skeletal muscle blood flow. So we reroute blood flow and nutrients and uh, essential materials from processes that we don't really care about while we're trying to outrun a bear to the organs and the tissues that are going to help us outrun that bear and hopefully, assuming everything goes well, ensure our survival. And those are things like our skeletal muscle. We don't need to be worrying about digesting things if we're not alive to digest those things. Now, conversely, our parasympathetic system, or PANS, is going to be important and integral in making sure that after we have escaped that bear, ideally, hopefully, it's going to take over our rest and digest processes, the rest and recovery. So, where the sympathetic system is important for fight or flight, the parasympathetic is important for rest and digest. And that's sort of a classic mnemonic, a rhyming scheme, rhyming mnemonic, to help remember the differences between the two. Sympathetic system is fight or flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest. So think of all of the functions that you do not need functioning while you are trying to outrun a bear, and just think of the opposite of that. So this system is going to be important in helping our body relax and regenerate. It's going to decrease our heart rate. It's going to increase digestion, where the sympathetic nervous system decreases digestion. Because what's the point of digesting if you're dying? Um, and yeah, so the parasympathetic system is important for maintaining normalcy, restoring things to normalcy. And this is where the importance of stress comes into play, because these systems, the ANS, is integral in our stress response and how we deal with stress. And they are complementary to one another, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. When we are stressed, the sympathetic system is ramping things up. And when that stress is gone, the parasympathetic system is helping to bring things back to a sort of baseline or a situation before you experienced whatever your stress response was. Now let's think about the anatomy of the A and S subdivisions. So anatomy of the SYNS and PANS. So, to truly understand how these two systems work together, we need to really understand their anatomical components, because these systems aren't just different in function, they are also different in form. And that's sort of the crux behind form versus function, anatomy versus physiology. So we have our SYNS and we have our PANS. Our sympathetic division originates in the thoracic and lumbar regions. Thoracic and lumbar regions of our spinal cord, specifically between T1 and L2. Yeah, L2. From here, the nerves exit and connect to the sympathetic chain. Sympathetic chain. Sympathetic chain, which is a series of interconnected ganglia that run alongside our spine. So we can think of our sympathetic chain as a superhighway for signals, allowing our body to send rapid and coordinated messages to multiple organs at once. So we have our preganglionics here. So we'll just call them preganglionic neurons. And we have our postganglionic neurons. And both the SYNS and the PANS are going to have that. So our preganglionics in the sympathetic division are going to be short and fast. And these fibers are going to leave the spinal cord and connect to the sympathetic ganglia. The postganglionics are going to be longer and extend from the ganglia. So I'll say this goes from the ganglia, goes to the ganglia. And the postganglionic fibers go from the ganglia to the target organs, like our heart or our lungs. So this goes to the heart, lungs, whatever's getting innervated. So while the sympathetic division is all about getting all hands on deck and simultaneously activating a bunch of different systems and engaging systems to really help us outrun that bear and ensure our survival, the parasympathetic system is all about precision and control. Its nerves originate in two places. We have our brainstem, brain stem, and the sacral region of our spinal cord. Sacral region of our spinal cord. With the brainstem origins, we have nerves like our vagus nerve, which is a major cranial nerve 10, that extends directly to organs like our heart, our lungs, and our digestive tract. So stimulating the vagus nerve is going to have a direct impact on these organs. Nerves from our sacral region are going to originate lower on the spinal cord, and they control pretty much what you would expect in that region. So this is our spinal cord. You would expect things to be controlled sort of at that level. So we have pelvic organs being controlled, like our bladder and our reproductive system. Bladder and sex organs. So Unlike our sympathetic system, which uses short and fast preganglionics, the preganglionic nerves or neurons of our parasympathetic system are going to be long. These are going to be long fibers that stretch directly to the ganglia located near or sometimes, oftentimes, inside the target organs. And then from there, we have postganglionic neurons that are going to be short. So these are just inverses of one another. The preganglionics and the postganglionics of our sympathetic are short and long, whereas with the parasympathetic system, they are long and short. And with the parasympathetic system, that postganglionic neuron is what's going to handle the final signal to the target. Now, the way this is set up, whereas when the sympathetic nervous system, again, it's all hands on deck, a single signal can activate multiple things. With the parasympathetic system, this works sort of one on one, so that if it's sort of an internal check of, hey, do we still have this organ? Did the bear eat it out of us? Are we still alive? Do we still have our souls? And so on and so forth. So the parasympathetic system focuses on specific organs, and this ensures careful regulation without overwhelming the rest of the body. Now let's talk about our adrenals. Our adrenals. So, our adrenal glands are two small but mighty structures that act as the secret weapon of our sympathetic nervous system, notably. Sympathetic nervous system. They are these, we can think of them as the ultimate amplifiers when it comes to our body's fight or flight response. So, how it works is that when our brain senses danger, so it's that's an I, it's sensing danger. The sympathetic nervous system is going to send signals, or we'll say a signal, to the adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla, which is the inner core of our adrenal glands. This triggers the release of two powerful hormones known as epinephrine, epinephrine, am I spelling this right? Epinephrine, yeah, and norepinephrine. I just spelled it. No, norepinephrine. Just spelled it. It's so dumb. And if you're European, then you will have heard of instead adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So, these hormones are going to flood our bloodstream, supercharging our body for immediate action. Alright, so where was I? Oh yeah. Gets flooded into the blood, and we are able to experience all of their actions. Now, between the two, epinephrine and norepinephrine, which for purposes of discussing this, I'm just going to call them epi and norepi. So epi and norepi. Epinephrine is going to increase our heart rate, increase our blood pressure. It's going to dilate airways. It's going to increase blood glucose. So So think of things, again, that are going to be useful in helping us outrun a bear. Dilating the airways is going to allow more oxygen to flow into our lungs and subsequently to our blood. And boosting our blood glucose levels will provide more energy, we'll keep it at energy, more energy to the respiring tissue that needs it to help outrun that bear, notably our skeletal muscle. Norepinephrine is going to be important in constricting blood vessels, so it's going to help constrict blood vessels, redirecting blood flow to critical areas like our muscle, or like our skeletal muscle. Now, unlike most organs controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, the adrenal glands don't rely on a postganglionic neuron. Instead, a preganglionic neuron is going to directly stimulate the adrenal medulla, making the response far faster because you have effectively cut out the middleman. And if you make the response faster, you can ideally make the response more efficient. So this sort of unique setup allows the adrenal glands to act as a bridge. Yeah, we can say act as a bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine systems, ensuring that our body can respond to stress in a matter of seconds as opposed to minutes and hours and so on and so forth. Because sometimes it's just a matter of seconds that spells the difference between a bear chomping down on our throats and us slipping away fast enough so that that does not happen. So, let's assume that the danger is now over, the danger is past. If we start thinking about it from the opposite side of things, the parasympathetic system comes into play to counteract the effects of epinephrine and norepinephrine. So it does all of the things that epinephrine and norepinephrine did. So it's going to, so we'll say PANS does the opposite. Does the opposite of all of this, but in a more slowed, more controlled, careful fashion. Because it makes sense, once again, for us to rapidly recruit a bunch of systems simultaneously to help us outrun that bear, but we need to do a sort of internal check and have a redundancy system in place to make sure that we're not missing any essential organs or, they haven't been forcibly removed from our bodies. Like, again, anything important within our bodies. Yeah, that could have been said better, but the emphasis here and the key here is that the parasympathetic system is doing the opposite of what the sympathetic system is doing. So, with the adrenal glands supercharging the sympathetic system, we've covered one of the most dramatic examples of our autonomic power. But there's also another sort of nervous system, and it is now classically considered to be its own nervous system, working independently inside of our body, and it is referred to as the enteric nervous system. Enteric nervous system, which you will just see often abbreviated as ENS. Now, this is the nervous system, sort of classically, or we generally describe it as being the nervous system of our digestive system. And it's so intricate and so sophisticated, and it's continuing to be studied and understood that we often just think of it as sort of a second brain, if you will, because of how extensive and how integral it is. The ENS has a vast network of neurons embedded in the walls of our digestive system. It operates more or less independently. operates more or less independently of our brain and spinal cord, but there is still communication with the autonomic nervous system. So there is still talk between the ANS and the ENS, which effectively means that our intestines, our gut, our digestive processes can manage things more or less on their own, processing food, absorbing nutrients, and ultimately eliminating waste, all without us having to consciously think about it. So let's break down what the ENS sort of overall does. It is important for peristalsis. It is important for secretion regulation. Yeah. So secretion regulation. It is important for blood flow control. And you'll often see me abbreviate flow as Q. That's sort of the standard um, symbol used to describe flow. Blood flow control. And we also have nutrient absorption and waste elimination. Nutrient absorption and waste elimination. Okay, so peristalsis. You may or may not have heard of this before. The ENS controls wave-like contractions of our digestive muscles called peristaltic contractions that help move food from our esophagus. Generally, once you've swallowed, once you swallow a bolus of food or a bolus of whatever, the internal reflexes, these internal ENS functions, if take over. So it's going to help push things. So if we think of our digestive tract as one long tube, we are going to actively squeeze specific areas so that we are effectively trying to push things down like a tube of toothpaste. So we're just going to keep squeezing, keep squeezing, keep squeezing, keep pushing down until we get the material in the area that we want. It is important in secretion regulation, so it regulates the release of enzymes and digestive juices to break down our food. The ENS is able to manage its blood flow, especially blood flow to the digestive tract, ensuring that our gut regularly has the energy and the resources that it needs to do its job. It's a constant process. It's never in a suspended state by any means, so it regularly needs to be able to regulate its own nutrient supply. And that happens with blood flow control and the blood flow that's provided to it. And then, of course, we have the sort of classic hallmarks of digestion. Digestion is important for nutrient absorption and waste elimination. So the ENS helps to make sure that nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream and waste is being efficiently eliminated, expelled, excreted. And when it comes to the communication between the ANS and the ENS, while the ENS is more or less operating independently, it is still closely linked to our ANS by way of our vagus nerve, that cranial nerve 10. So vagus nerve, also known as cranial nerve 10, Roman numeral 10. This connection allows our brain to influence digestion. So, for example, stress can trigger the sympathetic nervous system to slow down digestion, while the parasympathetic system, via the vagus nerve, can stimulate digestion again. So, vagus nerve is going to be more part of our parasympathetic nervous system than our sympathetic nervous system. And this is sort of a classic example of this people who research the digestive sciences, metabolism, uh, uh, nutrition, etc., often refer to this as the gut-brain connection. Gut-brain connection. Overall, why do we care about the ENS? The ENS plays a critical role in maintaining just our overall health. A well-functioning ENS can ensure proper digestion and nutrient absorption, while a dysfunctional one can contribute to situations like IBS, which hopefully most of us have heard of before, irritable bowel syndrome, or we can have chronic constipation, which is just the backup of what should be eliminated feces. So, our ANS is effectively its own little, I won't say utopia, but it's like a little microcosm that keeps our digestive system running smoothly, and it regularly adapts to our body's needs. But we also have chemicals, or the various neurotransmitters and other things that will influence it. But again, this sort of breaks down the ENS for our purposes in conjunction with the functions of the ANS. Now let's talk about the autonomic nervous system messengers. ANS messengers. These come in the form of neurotransmitters. So you'll just often see me abbreviate them as NTS. So we have our neurotransmitters. Spelling this right? Neurotransmitters. Yes, okay. And yes, or NT if we're talking about a single one. Neurotransmitters are going to be tiny chemical messengers that power the autonomic nervous system. These molecules help to bridge the gap between neurons and our target cells and control everything ranging from things like our heart rate to our digestion. And when it comes to our autonomic nervous system, there are two major neurotransmitters that we'll focus on that it does rely pretty heavily on. We have acetylcholine, acetyl, A-C-T-Y-L, it's all one word, acetylcholine. And we have our norepinephrine, or the name, and acetylcholine, we'll just often see abbreviated as ACH. So, between the two, we have, I will do, yeah, I think columns should be fine. If it's not, I can switch it up. Yeah, okay. I'll explain it like this. So, acetylcholine is going to be found in both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. It is going to be released by the preganglionics in both, and it is going to be released by the postganglionics in the parasympathetic nervous system. So it'll be useful if you want to really understand this for yourself. Draw out a chart that shows how a preganglionic, so we'll call this pre, and we'll call this the postganglionic. Yeah, I feel like I could have done that better, but again, for the purposes of what we're talking about, and for how you should really study this on your own, draw out a chart that compares and contrasts the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system and go over the pre's and the posts. Long, short, short, long, and what the neurotransmitters are that are being released by both. And going back to acetylcholine, Where was I? Yeah. Okay. So, when it comes to acetylcholine, we can think of it as the starter pistol. It is going to be initiating responses in our target organs. So, for example, acetylcholine is going to help our stomach secrete digestive enzymes when we are eating. Norepinephrine is going to be found only in the sympathetic nervous system or the sympathetic division, where it's going to be released by most of our pre or postganglionics, yeah. So postganglionics of our sympathetic nervous system are going to be releasing it. And in the same way that that our body responds to epinephrine and produces a response, and adrenaline and all of the classic effects that we are familiar with when it comes to epinephrine or adrenaline. Norepinephrine is going to act as the body's energizer, triggering an increase in heart rate. It's going to increase our blood pressure. Again, these are all sort of classic stress responses. So, when we have a bear chasing after us, norepinephrine is going to be very, very integral in helping our heart pump faster so that we can get nutrition, get oxygen to our actively respiring and probably burning skeletal muscles to hopefully eliminate the danger, at least outrun that danger, and get us back to a baseline slash lower stress level. So, how do these neurotransmitters function? Once released, the neurotransmitters are going to bind to specific receptors, which you'll just often see abbreviated as R, on our target cells. Once they bind to the receptors, they are going to trigger a response, but not all receptors are going to be created equally. They're highly specialized for a variety of tasks, for different tasks, and to different extents, if you will, or different levels. Our autonomic nervous system utilizes two overall categories of receptors. For our purposes, we'll just view it as two categories. We have our cholinergic, and we have our adrenergic. That's all. Adrenergic, cholinergic. Yeah, okay. And the names themselves should be pretty straightforward, or that should help you figure out what's going to be responding to what. Cholinergic receptors are going to bind to acetylcholine, whereas adrenergic receptors are going to bind to both epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, there are two overall types of cholinergic receptors to be familiar with. We have nicotinic receptors, and we have muscarinic receptors. Muscarinic receptors. Whereas with adrenergics, we have alpha receptors, which you often see like this, alpha receptors, and we have beta, which is that, beta receptors. Nicotinic receptors are going to be found in autonomic ganglia. These receptors are going to respond to acetylcholine and stimulate the next neuron along the autonomic ganglionic chain. Muscarinic receptors are going to be found on target organs, especially in the parasympathetic division. So we'll see that really, especially in the parasympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic division. They trigger specific actions like slowing down our heart rate and stimulating digestion. So, when as sort of a mechanistic map or how to view this, when acetylcholine binds to muscarinic receptors, it, especially in our heart rate is going to decrease. So again, you can sort of view it mechanistically. Alpha receptors, as far as alpha adrenergics are concerned, are going to primarily cause blood vessel constriction. So, cause blood vessel constriction. Redirecting blood flow to essential organs, especially during a stress response. Beta adrenergics are going to increase our heart rate, dilate airways, which together should hopefully, and the idea is that we are massively going to boost oxygen delivery to the organs that will help us outrun the bear, notably being our skeletal muscle. So, for example, or sort of a mechanistic way to think about this, when norepinephrine binds to beta receptors in our lungs, we are going to experience an expansion of our airways, which makes it easier to breathe, especially during a fight or flight response. So, now we have a pretty decent understanding of neurotransmitters and receptors. Together, they form a, a chemical pairing, a chemical symphony that ensures that our autonomic nervous system responds precisely and efficiently, efficiently to most, if not all, situations, especially visceral intrinsic situations, or to put it more easily, stress responses. So now we need to think about the sort of global view or look at it from a global view, and that comes in the form of multi-organ, multi-tissue innervation, and we call that concept dual innervation. Dual innervation. So, with understanding that our autonomic nervous system ensures balance between a stress response and a stress-free response, our organs experience this exact same thing. That is where a dual innervation or dual effect comes into play. Our organs, or most of our organs and tissues, receive input from both the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems. And we can view it as having yeah, actually, we can view it like that. So there's both an accelerator, and a brake on each of our major visceral organs. The sympathetic system acts as the accelerator, or the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic system acts as the brakes. So the two major systems that are a classic example of this dual innervation, of this multi-organ, multi-tissue effect system, are the heart as well as our digestive tract. So we have the heart, and we have our digestive tract. So this way. And we have our sympathetic nervous system, and we have our parasympathetic nervous system. Boom, 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 boom. So, with our heart, a sympathetic effect is going to increase the heart rate. It's going to increase the force of contractions, ultimately to help pump more blood during exercise or a major stress response, like a bear. With the parasympathetic system being involved, this acts to slow the heart rate, and it lowers the force of contraction, ultimately to help bring things back down to a resting state, ideally at a pre-bear, pre-running for your life state. With our digestive tract, we can think of it sort of in an entirely opposite sense. Because again, use the bear as the classic factor, the main factor in all of this. If a bear is chasing after you, what organs, what systems, what tissues do you need really functional in order to effectively outrun that bear versus what systems you need? They can kind of simmer down, they can quiet down for a little bit so that you can get to a safe space and those organs can continue their jobs. Digestive system is one of the best examples for that. So with a sympathetic effect, we are going to decrease our digestive activity, and we are going to divert energy, divert resources to muscles instead. So if you have lower blood flow to our digestive tract, it's going to naturally decrease that activity. And then the parasympathetic system has the opposite. That's the rest and digest system. It's going to increase activity, increase digestion. And again, going from a stress response to a relaxed response takes a little bit of time. Whereas going from a relaxed response to a stress response can again happen in a matter of seconds, and for some people, maybe even like less than a second, depending on reflexes and response times and whatnot. Because again, the impetus to preserve life is a lot stronger and more innately ingrained in our physiology than the desire to be a couch potato and relax. We also have some organs that don't receive dual innervation, so ones that are without that. So these are structures like our blood vessels. That's a really common example. I'll write that out actually. Blood vessels, BVs. Our blood vessels are controlled almost exclusively by our sympathetic nervous system. So, how does the body do that? If a system or if a tissue, if an organ or if a function is exclusively controlled by the accelerator versus the brake pedal, how do we ensure that we are not just continually revving? So that's where the frequency of sympathetic signals come in. So if we adjust the rate at which something is happening, versus we change the effect. So in the case of a decreased signal frequency, our blood vessels are going to dilate. And if we dilate our blood vessels, we make the pathway larger, we are going to see an increase in flow. And remember, flow, the abbreviation for flow is classically Q. And then if we understand what's happening in a decreased frequency situation, an increased frequency is going to cause blood vessels to constrict. Oh, and I guess I should point this out because I will be talking about this, especially in the cardiovascular system. Um, when we're talking about contraction or constriction, classically the symbol is used for contraction, constriction, and this is used for dilation, relaxation. At the very least, that's what I use, and I can't remember. Decades ago, I learned this, and sort of just became a standard for me. Then I'm using that now. In any case, uh, our blood vessels are going to constrict, and we are going to see smaller opening and therefore reduced blood flow. The final thing I really want to talk about when it comes to our autonomic nervous system is the central nervous system's influence on the autonomic nervous system. Impact on the autonomic nervous system. So I mentioned a few times, and the name itself tells you how it functions, but it's also slightly misleading. The autonomic nervous system doesn't function entirely automatically or independent of the rest of the body. It receives a considerable amount of input and information from our brain and spinal cord. In other words, those two collectively are referred to as the central nervous system. We can think of our CNS as the control system or the command center. And so there are a couple of different places where the central nervous system has a considerable amount of influence on the autonomic nervous system. So we have the level of the hypothalamus. We have the level of the brainstem. And we have the level of the spinal cord. Spinal cord. And if it makes sense, or it should be clear, and if it's not, we're going from more superior or deeper into the brain to outside, or more peripherally, more inferiorly. So, with the hypothalamus is going to be the master regulator. And in my endocrine system lecture, you will learn a considerable amount about the hypothalamus. It is the master regulator of our ANS. It is going to be important in processing information from the body and adjusting the autonomic functions. So some of the classic aspects that the hypothalamus is considerably or significantly involved in are things like body temp, maintaining overall proper core body temperature, thirst, hunger, and our stress responses. Our brainstem is going to control basic autonomic functions, notably things like heart rate, our blood pressure, and our respiratory rate. Our structures like our medulla as well as our pons are going to act like hubs, if you will. They're going to send signals to both sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways. Um, pons send things to both sympathetic and parasympathetic. And then with the spinal cord will serve as the highway, and that's generally how we always view the spinal cord. It is the highway for signal travel, signal transmission, and in this case, the autonomic signals are going to travel to and from the brain via the spinal cord. It also contains certain reflex pathways, so it's the highway. And it also has reflex pathways that allow for autonomic reflexes, such as what's classically known as the baroreceptor response, or the baroreceptor reflex. Baroreceptor reflex. That is important in stabilizing blood pressure, and we will talk more about that in my cardiovascular system lecture. So, We know what the players are with the central nervous system. Now let's figure out what they're doing. The central nervous system, excuse me, the central nervous system is going to integrate sensory information from the body and the environment to adjust autonomic output. So, classic things that we know the autonomic nervous system to be involved with are our stress response, stress, and our recovery. Mhm, mhm. With a stress response, our amygdala, tiny little structure in our brain, amygdala, amygdala, there. The amygdala is going to recognize danger and it's going to send signals to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is then going to activate the sympathetic nervous system, and that's going to trigger the fight or flight response. During the recovery stage, where once the threat is gone, the bear is either dead or you are sitting in your hotel room, or assuming you were on a mountain ski thing. Anyway, so that became messy. Assuming you have outrun or dealt with the stress response situation, the brain signals the parasympathetic nervous system to calm the body down, returning it to a state of rest. So, parasympathetic nervous system calms things down. So, with the amygdala, it has another important aspect, that's another major uh, factor to consider when dealing with our autonomic nervous system and understanding it. Emotions affect our autonomic functions considerably. So, when you're stressed out, for example, think about how, for many people, more often than not, heart rates elevate considerably. Because, again, the nervousness, the stress, the anxiety, all of that. And then ultimately meditation, if that is something you are engaging in, or if the stressors have been removed from your awareness, you are hopefully calming back down. The amygdala is a part of a system known as the limbic system. The limbic system includes both the amygdala as well as a structure known as the hippocampus, which is important in memory and memory consolidation, is going to connect our emotional states to autonomic responses. This is why calming activities like breathing or yoga can directly influence our autonomic nervous system, but we cannot consciously influence it. So, things like yoga, relaxation, meditation, breathing, deep breathing can reduce stress and improve overall balance. But again, we are allowing our emotional, so not allowing, it is our emotional state that is influencing the actual physiological response. We have no conscious control over it. No conscious, that's one, conscious control. I can't stress that enough. People, I mean, I've had students in the past who've claimed, well, I don't think I've ever had a student that's claimed that they can, but they've always claimed that they know someone or they've heard, blah, blah, blah. That people can just like increase and decrease their heart rate at will, blah, blah. That's impossible. That is physiologically, anatomically impossible. The only thing that you can control is your emotional state, and a lot of people, not a lot of people, but the people in these purported stories and claims, anecdotes, they are very clearly better equipped and are more used to being able to control their emotional state to the point where they can actively influence their physiological state in real time, so that it looks like just like a second, like you thought about it and boom, now your blood pressure's decreased considerably. Again, that is just person to person variability. The key thing here is that the emotional state is being manipulated. And I believe that is it for everything I wanted to talk about with regards to the autonomic nervous system. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please leave comments. Please leave feedback. Please rate everything. That would be very, very helpful, very useful in developing the course curriculums further. And I hope you take advantage of my question packet associated with the autonomic nervous system. Alright, guys, I love all of you, and I'm glad you are listening and you have a desire to learn, and I hope this helps you. And again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can also visit me at www.stemwithdrd or swdrd.com, or you can spell it out as STEM with drd.com. And you can submit a request to talk to me. We can go over whatever it is that you want that is outside of the courses. So if you want tutoring, if you want extra help, anything like that. But yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one. All right, bye.